Hello,
Hello.
welcome. Good to
Thank
see you.
you. You too. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, fine, thanks. I do like your backdrop.
Thank you. Yeah, been missing a bit of um yeah, home sort of cherry blossom seasons. Yeah, so I'm from Tokyo originally.
Ah, right, beautiful.
And wow, is that your background? Or is it the real background or is
It's real.
it's real? Okay. That's a great background, by the way.
So we'll just sort of chat for a few minutes to see if anyone else is going to join today. And I
Yeah.
know there's quite a lot going on this week, so I'm not sure how many people we're going to get in the session today.
Okay.
Um, uh, have you had a chance to take a look at the roadmap document?
Yeah. Yeah. I did have a look. The 2021 draft version. Yeah, it's quite a lot of uh, things to kind of digest. But yeah, I kind of wanted to mainly sort of know, get to know what you do, sort of from meetings to meetings. I think there's twice every month meeting, every other week on Thursdays.
So we've for the roadmap meetings we've switched to once a month at the moment,
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
just because we're fairly early in the year. So you know, we publish towards the end of the year,
Mm.
and then we aim to do an update
Yeah.
as we go through the year. So right
I
now
see.
we're still relatively up to date, and there's not much going on in terms of new changes.
Yeah.
But as we ramp into you know, trying to uh, add new stuff to the document and generally
Mm.
tidy things up, we may go back into the twice a month schedule again.
I see. Okay.
Um, so we we're completely collaborative here. So
Mm.
we welcome, you know, people coming along or, you know, contributing to the document,
Yeah.
you know, generally having input and
Mm.
you know, well, right now the focus really has been on trying to capture a record of what we think the challenges really are in the space,
Yeah.
and then, you know, start to look at what needs to be done
Mm.
to manage that longer term.
Yeah.
You know, obviously we're in a very new space,
Mm.
and everyone's making it up as they go along, but that will mature, and we want to try and make sure that it matures into something that is going to be viable
Mm.
in the medium to long term.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going to have to get a lot of people to back up and go in a different direction,
Mm.
and it can take decades to get that to happen. So
Yeah.
a lot of this is about trying to get in front of
Mm.
um, you know, understanding where the whole discipline needs to be, and you know, what tooling we might need, and those sorts of challenges. Hi there.
Hello.
Hi, how are you guys? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
You too.
So yeah, we've just been chatting over the, you know, the general role of the roadmap, and doing a
Yeah.
bit of an introduction. Um, so let me just post a link in the chat. That's our agenda document.
Yeah.
If you could just sign in on the document, and you'll see at the top, near the top of the agenda, there's this month's session and a list of attendees.
Yeah.
Just gives me a feel for, you know, who's involved and what input we're getting. So just to get everybody up to date, in terms of conferences, we've got CDCon coming up in about a month's time. We are probably going to be doing an MLOps SIG Birds of a Feather session, which will just be a sort of joint feedback session where everybody can get involved and ask questions and you know, share information.
Terry, what about there are two conferences that two places that we can maybe participate. The first one is the MLOps World Conference. Maybe we can do a quick presentation there. I think
yeah. So I've got a list of upcoming conferences that I need to also apply to. So I'm going to fire off a bunch of proposals to the latest ones. We've also got a slot in DevOps Summit in November. So starting to get a few opportunities in there to communicate.
That's great.
Now, if anyone wants to get involved on the CDCon session, then I can include you in the.
I'd love to help. I think I can help creating some slides over there to help you sharpen.
So it's not really going to be a presentation. It's more of a panel chat. So it would be a matter of being able to attend in real time, and then, you know, we just have a sort of off the cuff discussion about some of the work that we're doing, and then, you know, hopefully prompt some questions from the attendees, and then get into more of a discussion.
Is there a date?
There's a broad date for the 2 days of the conference, which I can share with you. I'm still waiting to find out what time slot we might have within that. I've asked for a sort of mid to late afternoon UK time, because that seems to map reasonably well to other time zones.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll as soon as I know what the slot is, I'll let you know, and then we can check and see if you're available.
All right.
Other than that, probably the big news this week is the leaking of the proposed EU regulations on AI. I don't know if anyone's actually had a look at the document.
No, I haven't.
It's quite concerning. It really would not be possible to be compliant with the regulations that they're proposing. It's built on a fundamental lack of understanding of how machine learning works. So there are lots of things in there which you could never hope to actually practically comply with. So, for example, there's a requirement for everyone working with the software to be trained to understand exactly how the system makes decisions. So, for deep learning, you're expected to be able to know and understand, a neural network, which is clearly not possible.
Interesting.
So my take on that is it's basically there are three things that related to that, 3 points. The first thing is I think that we as a subgroup of the CD Foundation, Linux Foundation, I think we should try and participate in some meetings, official meetings related to the regulation, to as experts in the field, to participate and give our expertise over there. I think it will also be good for public relations stuff. No, that's A. B, I don't see any way this can be any close to final, because, as you said, there are a lot of concerning problems with this document. C, I think in somehow it will push companies to adopt machine learning tools or platforms, because otherwise it will be hell of expensive to implement, tracking data and managing data. So maybe we can try, to juice the lemon.
So, responding to your first point, I will raise that with the CDF committee to get their feeling on whether it's appropriate for us to get involved at that sort of level. Certainly, I think that's something that needs to be discussed with the TOC, and then I'll feed back to you. I think the approach will be interesting on this one, because the drivers for this regulation may not be entirely what we expect. So this regulation may be more focused on trying to deliberately block American and Asian companies from being able to compete in Europe, rather than explicitly doing what it says on the tin. And if that's the case, there will be a rush to push it through, and then there will be a lot of publicity about EU being a world leader in AI regulation. In practice, a lot of what's in this document is very similar to what went into the GDPR regulations. And again, there's a lot of GDPR which is not actually practical to implement.
And especially to small businesses.
Yeah. So, welcome. I see we've got Artem joined us. And feel free to join into the conversation. We're very friendly. We don't bite.
I'm a first timer as well. So, and in terms of sort of our concern as MLOps special interest group towards these kind of regulations, is there a channel of communication that is already established, or how could we feed our concern back, or sort of, is there a way we can express in a more direct manner, rather than just as a kind of here's our concerns and recommendations.
So to this point, the group has really been focused on a more technical audience. So the idea really has been to try and capture the nature of the problem that we face when we start to work with machine learning solutions, and then, if you like, document an end-to-end requirement set, which we can communicate with anyone who's working on building solutions in that space, so that they're up to speed with understanding the full scope of what the problem domain looks like, rather than getting narrowly focused onto the bit of the problem that they can see right now, and then potentially getting sucked off into a blind alley because they were unaware of something that was about to come and bite them. Now, the idea was that would be very beneficial in terms of supporting teams who were building tooling for DevOps and MLOps, because it would help to steer people away from a number of blind alleys which exist in the current domain. That has built an asset which is quite useful in general terms for understanding some of the problems associated with machine learning, but it does still assume quite a technical understanding of a lot of the issues involved. It's not an ideal artifact for communicating with a non-technical audience in a way that will be easily understood. So it would be quite a lot of work for us to shape that into something that would be better suited for having the political conversations. It's not to say that's not something that we couldn't do collaboratively. I imagine that there will be a lot of conversations going on between the larger players in the space, because clearly this is going to exclude all of the digital businesses that the EU has been trying to encourage over the past few years. So that's obviously going to cause a lot of concern for a lot of people. But again, it depends whether this is a genuine attempt to provide consumer protection, or if it's more of a political stick which is intended to create trade barriers and then become a negotiating point in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
So other things that we should probably have a chat about. In general, our focus this year is on communication, because we've got this asset here now, which we feel is quite valuable in terms of painting a picture of what's going to happen when you go down the path of trying to build a machine learning solution, and what the pitfalls are, and where there are gaps in terms of being able to solve some of those problems today. But it's also quite clear that most people working in the space are not actually fully aware of all of these challenges right now. I don't know if anyone else is attending the ML conference that's going on at the moment, the Access conference with Tecton and Feast. But there've been a lot of talks there where people have been proposing solutions, and actually we already know that the solutions that they're proposing don't work because of the requirements that we've gathered in the roadmap. So it's a little bit concerning in that, you know, there's a lot of work going on worldwide at the moment, and lots of people are dedicating a lot of time to doing things, and actually they still don't know what they don't know in terms of what problems they're going to run into when they try and implement that. So it's quite important for us to find as many ways as possible to get the roadmap circulated more widely this year, just to save people.
Can you give us an example of what are you talking about? Feast implementation? Are you talking about something maybe more specific?
So you know,
the conference is mainly pushing to promote Feast and Tecton. 100% marketing conference.
So, for example, there was a discussion yesterday about what a third generation of machine learning system might look like, and really what it was describing was some of the pipeline-based machine learning solutions that were already built last year, and using some of the practices that we've put in the roadmap. So it's like, you know, people are investing time in doing something that actually there's already a good generic solution out there for, and they can just download it and use it because it's open source. So, you know, there is definitely a big communication problem in the space at the moment, making sure everybody has access to a full picture of what the problem space looks like. And then we also face the problem of how do we keep that that picture up to date? So how do we make sure that we are capturing new problems as they're discovered and factor them into the roadmap so that other people can also understand what those challenges are?
Okay. That's interesting. I think, you know, I'm not sure what's the way to, you know, try to solve them. If you're referring to the concept of feature stores, I think it's only a partial solution.
So yeah, I mean, you know, obviously that particular event will be heavily focused on feature stores because that's the nature of that event. But I think there's a bigger picture view here in terms of how people see the problem depends very much on which discipline they've come from. So people who've come from a data science background tend to see machine learning as a database problem, and they tend to build solutions that work like database servers.
To be honest, I don't think that's the data science people, but it's more like it's the engineer's vision over there, because the guys from Tecton, Mike, and I forgot the name of the other, the CTO, they come from engineering. However, I think we maybe want to answer what is the problem, because machine learning, operational and infrastructure, that's way too big. It's not one problem, but many problems. Like you have monitoring, you have feature management, and you have data processes, and you have model training, and you have operationalizing of the subject. So I think the question is, what are you trying to solve, and what is considered to be part of the MLOps problem?
So I think that's actually where I'm seeing the biggest gap at the moment, because the actual problem is that you are trying to build a product that includes some machine learning capability. But the thing you're trying to build is the product, not the machine learning.
Right.
So if you're going to succeed commercially, the focus has always got to be on the product and how you manage and maintain that asset across its life cycle.
That's right.
And the reality is that when you look at one of these products, it will be promoted as an AI product, but when you break down the overall product itself, about 5% of the overall effort goes into the machine learning bit, and the other 95% is in managing the rest of the product. And that includes a lot of conventional software assets, because a model on its own can't talk to anything. So your product is going to have a user interface, it's going to have integrations, it's going to be connected to things, it's going to be managing flows of data. And so machine learning assets never exist in isolation in the real world. They're always just another asset as part of an overarching product. So the path that a lot of companies have gone down in the ML space at the moment is to treat the machine learning assets as if they exist in isolation and deploy them as an atomic unit through a dedicated system that only does machine learning. And then that leads to a situation where you then have a lot of challenges trying to cost effectively manage your overall asset, because you've got one big chunk of it, which will be all of the web facing stuff, or all the UI facing stuff, and all the customer facing stuff, and all the integration stuff, which can all be deployed with DevOps and will be part of a CI/CD system. And you can work on a very, very fast cadence of doing a release every few hours if you need to. And then you've got this huge monolith, which is your machine learning stuff, which acts a lot more like a single database server instance rather than a distributed component-based model with the rest of your architecture. So I think a lot of companies are struggling when it comes to getting their models into production, because the paradigms that are being used to manage the machine learning assets are not a good fit for the production world.
So I don't know if you had time to read my article that I published a few days ago. So I totally agree with what you said. I think that there is a very, very big problem deploying models to production. And that's because when you do want to deploy models to production, you can't just click on a button and it's on production. You need to work closely with a different role in the organization, and you need to build together this productization overhead. So let's say I'm an engineer and you're a data scientist. So now you need me to have time to sit with you, to understand your problem, to have multiple meetings, to plan a new design for productization, to write some code, to do QA, to understand that, hey, I didn't understand how you define age, and age is an integer, it's not a double, and then I need to re-implement it. All of this cycle, which is very, very complex because there is no one ownership for the productization or for the product. And the way I see it is, in order to solve that, we need somehow to mitigate between these two layers. And the technical solution I propose is to split the initiatives to model development and data development in a similar manner to front end and back end, you know. So there will be a tight relationship between these two processes, but it's two different processes.
So I think there are multiple architectural ways that you can decompose the problem, but I think what's significant here is that, you know, this is not a new problem. This is actually something that we went through in the traditional software space some time ago, and the solution to that problem was DevOps as a methodology. So the really DevOps is driven around the idea that
I think that the DevOps solved only part of the big problem. So the big problem is, how do you build fast applications? So there were two solutions. One is to split the front end and the back end. And the second solution was DevOps, which is how to make these products operationalizing, right?
Yeah, so let's split out the technical architecture from the conceptual approach to managing an asset, because those are actually different
Totally
aspects of.
Totally agree. Yeah. I think that there is MLOps and there is AI infrastructure, and nowadays people just call everything MLOps or call everything ML infrastructure, and there is no differentiation between these two terminologies.
Yeah, well, I think there's actually a deeper problem here in that right now the phrase MLOps is being used to describe something which is unrelated to DevOps, and that is misleading people, because, you know, within the CDF we strongly believe that MLOps needs to be an extension to DevOps if it's actually going to deliver the value that we expect from it. So DevOps is on the surface a bunch of practices, but those practices all exist for a very explicit reason. But those reasons are hard-won knowledge from people making mistakes in production environments and losing their companies as a result. And of course, a lot of the machine learning projects haven't got that far yet. So there's a blind spot in terms of understanding why DevOps exists and what its driving principles are. So we've got people who are trying to develop, you know, ways of working within MLOps without understanding what the purpose of DevOps was in the first place. So we've got a communication role there, which very much falls to us to say, look, DevOps exists because of these problems that you will face when you try to manage your asset in a commercial sense. And DevOps as a practice does this, this, and this, because if you don't do those things, your costs will spiral out of control and you will eventually lose your asset. And machine learning just adds a new class of asset into that same problem space, which you are also playing in. So you need to be doing DevOps and MLOps rather than either DevOps or MLOps, which I think is the situation we're in right now in a lot of cases. So we're currently working on a best practice guide within the CDF, which is spelling out a lot of the the fundamental drivers for DevOps, and hopefully that will help to communicate what some of these challenges are.
So if I can extend to what you just said, I 100 actually I'm 1000% agree with you. So MLOps should be the extension for DevOps to handle with ML-oriented problems. However, that might not be enough, because if we will take a look about DevOps, let's say you need to deploy a complex application that should take, user upload an image and the image should be uploaded to a server. So if you need to manage that, so for a DevOps perspective, that's very complex because you need to handle, persistent storage and all of this stuff. However, let's say you put there the S3, so that's reducing the complexion of DevOps, because then you use an infrastructure tool that replaced all of the persistent storage problem for you as an operational function. So I think that in order to overcome the challenges of deploying machine learning or AI in general, we need to solve these two problems: how to simplify the technical solution and how to simplify the way to operationalize these new technologies.
Yeah, and this is where I think we have to be quite careful, because many of the proposed simplifications actually come as a result of discarding certain things and saying, right, we'll simplify by not doing this stuff, but the stuff that's being discarded is actually essential to addressing the overall problem domain. And so right. you get oversimplifications that then paint you into a corner, and you then get a product that can do certain things really easily, but can't actually do all that it needs to do in order to be a viable product. And that's pretty much a good description of where the MLOps tooling market is right now, in that a lot of people have made assumptions about what they can simplify out, and have built tools to optimize for those scenarios. But as a result, we don't have a good generic tool that allows us to cope with all of the problems that actually exist within the domain. So this is where there's a lot of hidden complexity, and what we need to do is provide ways to consistently manage the complexity so people can understand it, but we can't magically make the complexity go away. So instead of pretending it doesn't exist, what we have to do is build tools that that label it and standardize it, and so becomes easier to understand. So in many ways, we're looking at what's effectively a parallel to containerization in the real world, in that we went from deploying things onto physical computers, which works, but it wastes a lot of resources, and it's every computer you deploy gets configured slightly differently, and therefore there's no consistency and there's a lot of complexity. So then we went, oh, well, actually, we're not using most of the resources on these computers that we've already got. So why don't we split them down into virtual computers and deploy into the virtual computers so that they can share the physical resources of one machine, and that gets you a bit more compute efficiency. But then everyone was still building their VMs by hand and doing it differently. So every VM running on the machine was a bit different. So that made the VMs hard to manage because you never quite knew how it had been set up and how you needed to maintain it. So then we went to containerization, which says, right, well, let's just create this idea of a completely virtual set of computing resources which spread across lots of physical machines, but which all have the same configuration and the same way of setting them up. And then it doesn't matter how many resources you need, somebody will plug some more hardware in the back end, and your application will just spread onto that new hardware. So that gave you a level of abstraction that made it simpler to conceptually work, but at the same time, it created this massive amount of complexity within the infrastructure, where you actually have to be able to manage all of these things in a consistent way using consistent tooling. And so the complexity still exists, but it's buried in an abstraction layer where only a limited number of team members actually need to engage with it. So this is where we're sitting with a lot of the ML problems right now, in that, you know, yes, you can build bespoke solutions for doing ML ops to solve your problem in the short term, but if we want to be able to do ML ops cost effectively, like we do with other types of software, then we need a lot of standardized tooling that all plugs together in a consistent way, that takes away the complexity from some teams and buries it in a separate layer, so that we're not all getting dragged into all of the complexity, but at the same time we have the flexibility to manage all of the problems that exist within the problem domain itself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
go ahead,
actually.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go.
Right.
Oh yeah. Okay. I'll be quick.
Okay, fine.
So that's quite interesting point, and I was reading the roadmap as well around kind of MLOps has to be a discipline that is language and framework and platform infrastructure agnostic, and that's kind of an interesting and in the point that you raised, Terry, about kind of how to increase exposure to this MLOps roadmaps, and all of that sort of what ML ops has to be kind of point towards things like Kubernetes, which I think is quite well aligned in terms of it is quite agnostic platform for allowing sort of deployment of containerized application. And so is there kind of a scope with for this group to kind of either endorse or collaborate such sort of technologies such as Kubernetes in a way that sort of we recommend, or and then vice versa? So on the Kubernetes side, if they agree with our objectives and recommendations, sort of point users towards this recommendation or some kind of mention of sort of the work that's been put into this group.
Yeah, so that's a good question. what we're trying to do is to communicate with teams who are building solutions in this space, and get them to understand the implications of the problems that are in the roadmap, so that they start to come up with technical solutions that actually address the full scope of the problem domain rather than just part of it. Now, Kubernetes is a potential approach to solving some of these problems. With my other hat on, I lead the MLOps work within the Jenkins X CI/CD solution, and we have an MLOps component which actually does use Kubernetes to do all of the machine learning training and deployment. So yeah, there are some solutions out there already that are going down that path, and they don't actually need to be directly supported by Kubernetes. So the Jenkins X solution is leveraging the other Tecton with a K rather than a C, which is a standard pipeline component for Kubernetes, and so we just turn machine learning assets into things that can align with a standard Tecton pipeline, and then we just use standard build capabilities to distribute the trainings and to run the model inferencing. So yeah, that stuff is going on, but I think we still got a bit of a void between the teams who are build focused and the teams who are ML focused, and there's still work to be done to get everybody understanding the full scope of the problems that they're facing.
Yeah.
So Artem, back to you.
Yeah, I had a maybe stupid question because I'm partially not in the context of SIG MLOps roadmap, but sorry for that if it is.
There are no stupid questions. There are just good questions.
All right. So my question is from the perspective of infrastructure, and as you were telling the history of like progress from virtual machines to containers, how is ML and MLOps so different from already solved problem for software engineering? Is it like large amount of data, or so from my point of view, most of the complexity is concerned on the ML layer, not on the infrastructure layer.
See, that's actually one of the most important questions in MLOps. So you're bang on the money there with that one. Broadly speaking, CI/CD to date has been focused on easily packageable assets that can be lumped together and deployed atomically onto a system. So you've got some code, you build the code, you test it, you deploy it somewhere, you run some integration tests on it, and then you switch it live. That's a solved problem, and there are lots of good solutions out there in that space. What's different for MLOps is that in order to do a training run, you need a training script, which is a software asset effectively that you can deploy in the same way as CI/CD. But that training script will be tiny, but then you need 4 petabytes of training data that you also need in the system. Now, under the current model, you basically have a big database effectively, which has got all of your data in, and then you point the training script at the database, run it, and it spits out a model. But the problem is that you don't have any versioning over the data that you used for training your model. So if that data is, for example, data that's being collected by autonomous vehicles that are in the field, then that pool of data is being updated, you know, by petabytes a day potentially, and it's constantly changing. So you can't rerun the same training twice and get the same result if you've got an uncontrolled set of training data that you're training against. Now that doesn't stop you from coming up with good models, but it will stop you from coming up with compliant models, because what the legislation is going to say is you have to deploy a model which has full traceability back to all of the original source data. If you change anything, you have to be able to run a regression test to prove that your model has solved a problem that was in the original model. And you have to be able to allow every person whose data exists in your pool of data to object to it and have their information removed, not just from that data set, but from any model that was trained using that data set. Yeah. So this is how bad the actual problem is going to be compared to what we think we're solving right now, in that we need a completely reversible chain of custody over all of the data that we're using to produce our models. And when we deploy something into production, we need to know exactly which set of data was used to train that model, and potentially need to be able to recreate that explicit training set in the future. I mean, you know, imagine you've launched a product, you've put it out there in the world, and 10 people died. You know, there's going to be an investigation and at least one court case. And the onus is going to be on you to prove that you did everything to the best of your ability to build a safe system. So you're going to need to be able to demonstrate exactly how you built the system, and what data was used in that process.
But as far as I understand, this is still like far related to the problem of managing resources. So imagine we have a super huge, super flexible database that allows us to fixate the, let's say, immutable slices of, let's say, commits of data, subsets of data, train on them, version them, change them, maybe delete from them some rows, delete the user's data, track back. So if we had this fully data managed solution, then we still, so first question, is the problem solved? And second problem is, are there any other infrastructure Kubernetes related problems like at this level? So
yes, that's one of the technical solutions that we suggest is needed in the roadmap. So, you know, that partial bits of that solution exist today, but there's nothing that you can go to off the shelf and just say, right, here is a data lake that is completely versionable, that integrates into a CI/CD system in such a way that you've got full traceability. So that's a product that somebody needs to build that is a critical dependency for deploying any high-risk AI system within Europe, as an example. So, but this is the flip side of the roadmap, is that actually it's a long list of problems that people need to be working on that will actually have high value. Because if you build one of these things and sell it, you'll make a lot of money because there's a captive market. This has to exist for people to be able to sell AI products. So one of the selling points of the roadmap really is that this is one way of working out what to work on next, because we're making some pretty strong predictions about what the market is going to look like over the next 5 years, and where there are commercial opportunities to be had. And in our answer to the second part of your question, yeah, there are other aspects to this that will need to be solved. There are lots of governance challenges that sit within this space, and the expectation of regulators is a long way away from what's practically possible right now with the tools that we have. So there will be lots of things that we could insert into the release pipeline, which would allow us to automate a bunch of the governance problems, but solutions don't yet exist for them. So, for example, whenever you train a model, you want to be able to do bias testing on that model. Now, there are some tools out there for building your own bias testing approaches, but really what we need is a standard component that says, here's the types of bias that we expect to encounter in the customer domain that we're working in. Apply those generically to each model we produce and give us a score for that model. And then you just report those scores as part of the quality metrics for the models that you're generating. So all of these are effectively individual products that could come from independent vendors, but if they're built in a standard way, they could easily be integrated into anyone's overall pipeline, to allow them to improve the quality of what they're building.
Can I have one more question, please?
Yeah, of course, carry on.
What do you mean the standard way? Is it the way that goes standard first and then implementation, or is it easy pluggable to some widespread platform as Kubernetes, for example?
Really what we're looking at is collaborative standards for pluggability rather than formal standards for this is how you shall work. So the idea is that we want to encourage a level playing field, but with lots of opportunity for lots of vendors. So if you look at some of the CDF projects, you'll find that there are actually multiple CDF projects that are effectively competitors to each other because they do the same thing. But we have an overarching interoperability group that negotiates some standards for the way we name things and the way we represent them. So where there's commonality, those products actually become interchangeable, and the customer gets to decide which one they want to use in their infrastructure. So we're trying to avoid too much proprietary lock-in. Instead, we're saying, look, here's a whole suite of tools. Each of these solves a particular problem in a different way, but they're mostly interoperable within this broader sense of you can have a pipeline for deployment and you can plug these things into it. So in that way, the customer is free to build something that meets their needs. And there's plenty of room for everybody to compete on quality and features.
Thanks.
All right, guys, I have to cut off. Terry, I guess I'll see you on the second meeting.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that one too much. Nobody's been attending that one for months. So I
all right.
go up, but it's
I thought Michael wanted to join, but then he said he couldn't, right?
No, that was this session.
All right.
Is it a weekly?
He's in Australia, so this is his nighttime.
I didn't get that.
Is it a weekly meeting or monthly?
This slot is monthly. There's another US time zone slot, which is later on today, but that one was being used for another purpose and has wound down, so it doesn't have much attendance right now. If we get more collaborators coming in from that time zone, then I'll continue to run both sessions. But right now, this is the one that's driving most of the work.
All right, so I guess I see you next time.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. It's been great to have your involvement, and I hope we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Happy to see you next time.
Feel free to reach out to me offline, and you know, any questions or anything you want to contribute, just fire me a message. Join the Slack.
Okay. Bye bye.
Great.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye.